It's a hero maximum. On the ground, down the ground, another hero maximum.
In May 2003, a 20-year-old seamer with blonde streaks made his Test debut at Lord's for England. In May 2024, 21 years later, a 41-year-old seamer with grey streaks now has announced his retirement from Test cricket. In between those two times, that seamer compiled the following stats: 187 Test matches, the second of all time, 700 Test wickets, third most of all time, and the most by any seamer. He did that at an average of 26.5. He took 32 5-wicket hauls, 7th all time. Jimmy Anderson announced on socials that on the 10th of July he will play his 188th Test match, and it will also be his last Test match. After 21 seasons, the GOAT, Jimmy Anderson, will no longer be an English Test cricketer. He has been an England player longer than he has not been an England player, to put that in perspective. Jacko, the news broke this week. What were your immediate thoughts when you heard the news?
I think it's one of those things when you're in the sort of twilight of a career, you sort of know it. I think it's a pretty sad day. I think for the fast bowling cartel, as you sort of pointed out there, he is a true great of the game. I think a testament to sort of how long he's playing, that he came in with the blonde streaks and they've actually gone out of fashion and come all the way back sort of during his career. So, a lot of people will sort of span that time. And I think the GOAT conversation in terms of fast bowlers, you probably can't leave him out of it. And a lot of people will harp on
definitely a conversation.
Oh yeah, and a lot of people would almost discredit him for saying if these guys played as long as him, they would have similar records or whatnot. But for the fact is that they couldn't do that. To see it like a true, I don't even know sort of how to describe it, just in terms of someone playing for that long at the elite level, I think puts him sort of potentially in that GOAT status. There's a couple of guys sort of in that conversation, but I think where people might discredit that, I think it's a real testament, and you've got to just sort of admire the ability to play. And I mean, we're talking last year, he was playing in India, being effective, not going for many runs. Like, the skills are still there, and for him to be able to go out on top in his 40s is astonishing, really.
I think one of the things he's probably done over the last sort of 5 or so years is sort of debunked that myth that he can't bowl away from cloudy conditions. Like, obviously, if there are cloudy conditions, he is probably one of one. I don't think there's anyone else you would rather in the history of the game. But I think over the last 5 years, he's proven an absolute asset. Anywhere it takes, it doesn't have to move. He will do a job for his country. And I have got some stats here, because I think, the question is, is he the greatest bowler of all time? It is thrown around a lot, and I think for a while I've pushed back at that. Probably less so much now, and I think a lot of that is like you said. I think he is sort of. I think he's the LeBron James of fast bowling, where the stats are just overwhelming at this point. But I think heart of hearts with LeBron, like LeBron versus Michael Jordan, for instance, I think one game prime of the primes. I think most people would perhaps take Michael Jordan, but I think LeBron's had a better career. And I think the same is with Jimmy Anderson. I think that's been my initial reaction, but I sort of dug a little deeper into his stats, because, my argument's always been my GOAT would be like Glenn McGrath. Like, I think maybe that's me growing up with him. I think his stats.
When I was thinking
you got guys like. Yeah. So
I was thinking McGrath 1, Anderson 2.
Yeah, Staines, another one that I liked. And I think a lot of that was around Anderson's average was a little higher, and the other averages were like the sort of low 20s. But then as I sort of dug into Anderson's career, I I'm just going to throw some stats out to you. So between the years of 2010 to 2022, so that's 12 years. That's a whole career. We're talking 133 test matches Jimmy Anderson played in that time. He took 527 wickets at an average of 23.6, and he took 25 fifers. So, like, in that time, no one took more wickets. No one took more fifers. Only 4 bowlers had a better average with more than 200 wickets. Cummins, Steyn, Philander, and Rabada. And if you just put 527 wickets into, if you just put that career, if he just played that career, you'd think like he would be a GOAT, because that is like, those stats are like on par with your McGrath. They're ahead of, that's more wickets than Steyn, just that 12-year period. He only averaged more than 30 twice over that, like in a calendar year over those 12 years. So I think looking at that, I think I've now sort of arrived at the point where it is subjective. And like I said, I think McGrath would be my personal GOAT. And I think a lot of that maybe is, I just grew up in that era. But if someone comes at me and tells me Jimmy Anderson is the GOAT, I'm not arguing. Like, I'm just going, I get it. I get it. I think there's an argument that he is the GOAT.
Well, it's sort of similar. You know, we're loving a we American sports comparison. It's almost like your Brady comparison, isn't it? Because if you look at Tom Brady, the first 8 years of his career, they say, is a Hall of Fame career. He was a couple of Super Bowls, multiple MVPs. Second part of his career, the second Hall of Fame career. And if you can, you know, split sections of your career up and say, like, you know, these are arguably, you know, and that's a 12-year period. Like, that's well more than, you know, 90% of your Test cricketers get. And for that to be a portion of his career, just, I mean, speaks, the longevity is just, the more you think about it, and I think the more you think about like fast bowling in general, like, you know, Cummins, he's missed 4, 5, 6 years. James Pattinson never on the park. Like Stark, there's, you know, even these English guys, the new wave of English seamers, there always seems to be, like, you know, Jofra spends so much time. I think how tough fast bowling is on the human body, for him to then, you know, do that longer and better than nearly everyone else is, yeah, you've got to have him 1-1 almost over your McGrath, and that just comes down to personal preference and rose tinted glasses and nostalgia will probably, I'm like you, probably lead me to McGrath, and that's probably because we watch a lot more Australian cricket. But yeah, I could talk myself into Anderson on any given day.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar to LeBron versus Jordan. I think if you asked me who I wanted to bowl one spell in their prime in any conditions in the world, I'm taking McGrath. If you ask me who's had the better career, I'm taking Anderson, and that's exactly how I see the GOAT debate in basketball. The best career is LeBron. The better player is Jordan, and that's where I'll land anyway.
I think as well, like, and probably an extra testament to like his career and stuff is it was still a wee bit of a shock when I saw it. Like, I was still like, you know, you could sort of tell it was probably not far away, but it was still like, oh shit, he's only going to play the first test. Like, I suppose he probably wants to end his career at Lord's. Like, that's a pretty cool way to do it. But I was still like, shit, I thought he could have had this whole sort of World Cup cycle in him, maybe. Yeah, to see it and then go, oh shit, I like sort of still didn't expect it. Still, like, says to how much, you know, how good of a player he is and how good of a player he still is now. That, you know, he's getting to go out on top after, 21 years in the game.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, because I think if they weren't talking about the Ashes in 2025, they might have had a different conversation. Like, if that wasn't so important to blood players and just build for that. And like, if you just said, oh, Jimmy, if you just play every home summer for the next 5 years, I think he could do it. I genuinely think he could do it. But I think that's probably not sustainable in this day and age. So I think they sort of come to a realization that now is probably the right time for both parties. And I think it makes sense.
Yeah, Yeah, I imagine there was some sort of forward planning to it as well, saying like, look, do you think you can play the 25 Ashes? And the honest conversation was probably that's a wee bit far away. But yeah, I mean, getting a swan song sort of at Lords, one last test, you know you're going to play. Fuck, the crowds will be out. It's going to be a spectacle, I think.
Doesn't get picked. Dag.
Yeah, so looks like it'll turn. We'll go with two spinners.
Yeah. Anything else to add on that, Jacko, or should we move on? It's probably tied a nice wee bow on that.
Yeah, I think don't want to blow too much smoke up his ass, to be honest.
Tim Southey's probably better, to be fair.
If he had that many tests.
That's not an actual take.